Did you know that nearly 70% of people end up in the same type of relationship over and over again, even when they swear they'll never repeat the same mistake? That's not random. That's not bad luck. That's psychology, memory, and hidden patterns pulling the strings of your life. So let me ask you directly, why do you always attract the same type of people? Why does it feel like no matter how far you run, you always meet the same kind of partner, the same kind of friend, the same kind of boss? Neuroscience reveals that your brain is wired to seek what's familiar, not what's healthy, which explains why another study found that people with unresolved emotional wounds are 3 times more likely to recreate the same toxic patterns in adulthood. And this is where it gets personal. Because if you've ever asked yourself, why me? Why does this keep happening? The truth is, you're not broken. You're repeating a story your unconscious never finished writing. The good news is, once you see the story, you can change the ending. If what I'm saying resonates with you even a little, show me a sign. Like the video, share it, drop a simple thank you in the comments, or subscribe so you don't miss the rest. When Carl Jung, one of the fathers of modern psychology, said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate," he wasn't speaking in abstract terms. He was pointing at something each of us has experienced, but rarely dares to question. Why do we keep meeting the same kind of people over and over again? Why do some of our relationships feel like déjà vu, as if we're stuck in a loop we didn't choose? Studies in psychology have shown that almost 70% of people report repeating the same toxic relationship patterns at least twice in their lives. That's not coincidence, that's a hidden design playing out in the background of our minds. Sigmund Freud suggested that humans suffer from what he called the repetition compulsion, a drive to unconsciously repeat painful experiences in an attempt to resolve them. It's the reason why someone raised in a cold and distant household might repeatedly be drawn to partners who seem emotionally unavailable. The brain seeks familiarity, not happiness. Neuroscience confirms this. Research at Stanford University revealed that the brain lights up more intensely when exposed to familiar stimuli, even when those stimuli are harmful. We are wired to return to what feels known, not necessarily to what is good for us. But it's not just Freud or Jung who observed this. Seneca, 2,000 years earlier, warned that the greatest slavery is to be a slave to habits. He wasn't talking about coffee or routine. He was speaking about our emotional habits, those invisible scripts that dictate how we relate to others. Think of it. If 80% of our daily thoughts are recycled from the day before, as neuroscientists have found, how different can our choices in people really be unless we consciously break the cycle? And here's where the tension builds. Because maybe you've noticed it in your own life. You meet someone new and at first, everything feels different, refreshing, hopeful. But within months, sometimes even weeks, the same cracks appear. The same arguments resurface, the same disappointments. It's as if you've been walking in circles and ended up at the same place, even though you thought you were moving forward. This is not a personal failure. It's a universal human tendency backed by both ancient philosophy and modern science. Take the case of actor Marilyn Monroe. Behind the glamour, her private life was marked by repeating cycles of toxic love, partners who mirrored the instability of her childhood. Psychologists studying her biography often point out that without healing the original wound, we unconsciously attract its reflection again and again, and she was not alone. Studies from Harvard's Grant Study, one of the longest-running studies on human happiness, show that unresolved childhood attachment issues often resurface in adult romantic relationships, influencing not just love, but also career and friendships. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Modern neuroscience agrees. Each repeated emotional experience strengthens neural pathways, making it easier to relive the same pattern than to break it. That's why someone who has been repeatedly betrayed may grow to expect betrayal everywhere, unconsciously choosing people who will fulfill that prophecy. The pattern becomes both the lens and the prison. But here is the paradox you must understand. These patterns are not random punishments, they are signals. When you find yourself repeatedly meeting the same type of person, whether it's the manipulative boss, the distant partner, or the unreliable friend, it is not just bad luck. It is your psyche trying to solve a puzzle it doesn't yet know how to complete. Jung believed these recurrences are life's way of forcing us to grow, to confront the shadow we'd rather ignore. Freud framed it as unresolved desire. The Stoics framed it as fate testing our awareness. Neuroscience frames it as neuroplasticity gone on autopilot. Different languages for the same truth. So why does this matter to you right now? Because the moment you see the pattern, you already begin to weaken it. Awareness is the crack where the light enters. Statistics show that people who go through therapy to identify their relational patterns are 40% less likely to repeat the same toxic bonds. Awareness literally rewires the brain. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and survivor of the concentration camps, put it simply: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose. That space is what separates repetition from transformation. You are not cursed to always attract the same kind of people. But until you understand the hidden forces, your emotional memory, your unconscious drives, your habits of thought, you will continue to walk the same path, even if you change the scenery. The hidden patterns are not enemies. They are mirrors, and they will keep showing up until you finally dare to look deeper. Sigmund Freud once observed that we are never so defenseless against suffering as when we love. His words hint at a mystery that has baffled thinkers for centuries. Why do we find ourselves irresistibly drawn to certain people, often against our own better judgment? Carl Jung offered another angle, claiming that what we don't resolve internally, we project externally, especially onto those we love. Neuroscientists today would describe this as the interplay between unconscious memory, attachment systems, and the brain's reward circuits. Attraction, it turns out, is never just about chemistry. It's a cocktail of psychology, biology, and hidden stories from our past. Let's start with the numbers. Research from the Kinsey Institute revealed that 85% of people report feeling chemistry with someone within the first minutes of meeting. But when scientists looked deeper, they discovered this chemistry was not random. Brain scans showed that dopamine floods the reward centers when we encounter someone who resembles figures from our emotional past. In other words, the spark we call attraction is often recognition. We are not simply meeting a stranger. We are meeting a reflection of an old story our brain already knows. Freud would call this a repetition compulsion. Jung would call it the shadow at play. Modern psychologists call it attachment theory. The patterns of closeness, avoidance, or anxiety that we develop in childhood shape how we perceive intimacy as adults. For example, studies by Mary Ainsworth and later psychologists showed that nearly 60% of adults carry a secure attachment style, while the rest struggle with anxious or avoidant tendencies. These tendencies are not neutral. They dictate who feels attractive to us and who doesn't. The anxious individual may feel irresistibly drawn to someone emotionally distant, because that distance mirrors what love once felt like in childhood. This is why the pull is so strong. It's not that you're weak or naive, it's that your nervous system is looking for completion. Jung described it as the anima and animus, our inner feminine and masculine, projected onto others in an attempt to find wholeness. Freud framed it in terms of unresolved desire. Neuroscience shows us the mechanism. When a familiar emotional pattern is triggered, the amygdala signals the brain that this is significant, even if it's harmful. The prefrontal cortex, the rationale part of the brain, is often overpowered. This explains why in moments of passion, people make choices they later describe as irrational. And it doesn't only affect love. Attraction shapes friendships, professional alliances, even the enemies we choose. Seneca warned that every man prefers what is familiar to what is better. The Stoics knew that left unchecked, attraction is less about freedom than it is about habit. Imagine someone repeatedly drawn to domineering friends. On the surface, it may look like bad luck, but underneath, it's the psyche recreating a dynamic it learned long ago, trying again to master it. Modern therapy confirms this. Cognitive behavioral approaches show that identifying and reframing these unconscious choices dramatically alters who we feel attracted to. Consider the neuroscientific proof. In 2019, researchers at University College London found that when participants were asked to rate strangers' attractiveness, their brain scans revealed spikes in activity in the hippocampus, the region tied to memory. Attraction was literally memory in disguise. That stranger felt magnetic because, unknowingly, they carried echoes of someone from the past. And here lies the paradox. What feels like destiny might just be psychology replaying itself. This doesn't make attraction meaningless, it makes it powerful. It means that what you are drawn to says as much about your inner world as it does about the person in front of you. Freud saw attraction as a disguised repetition. Jung saw it as a chance for integration. Neuroscience sees it as memory circuits firing. The Stoics saw it as an opportunity for awareness and mastery. 4 different frameworks, one shared conclusion: attraction is never random. So, when you ask yourself why you always end up with the same type of person, realize this: the answer is not outside of you, it's within. The brain is wired to seek the familiar. The heart longs to resolve unfinished stories. The soul projects what it has not yet embraced. Recognizing this doesn't kill the magic of attraction, it deepens it. Because once you know the forces at play, you can begin to choose with clarity instead of compulsion. Attraction is not a curse, it is a mirror. And the moment you start to see its reflection, you step from unconscious repetition into conscious freedom. That is where real love, real connection, and real growth can finally begin. When Carl Jung explored the depths of the psyche, he wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Few truths strike harder when we look at the wounds we carry, because if attraction pulls us toward people, it is our wounds that decide whether we repeat the past or finally break free from it. And statistics prove how universal this struggle is. Nearly 65% of adults admit they have carried childhood emotional wounds into their adult relationships, according to studies published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. The invisible scars of our earliest experiences shape who we trust, who we fear, and even who we love. Sigmund Freud identified this as the repetition compulsion. A child neglected or abandoned doesn't simply forget. Instead, the psyche stores this pain like a script and seeks to replay it, not to suffer again, but to finally resolve it. Paradoxically, this means we often feel magnetically drawn to the very people who can reopen our wounds. The distant parent echoes in the emotionally unavailable partner. The controlling caregiver reappears in the domineering boss. Neuroscience backs this up. Brain imaging studies show that trauma alters the amygdala, the brain's fear center, making us hyper-alert to familiar threats. Familiarity, even when painful, feels safer to the wounded brain than stepping into the unknown. Seneca once said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." But for someone carrying an old wound, the imagination is not fantasy. It is memory disguised as present experience. When an old scar is touched, the body reacts as if the injury is happening again. This is why an innocent disagreement with a partner can suddenly feel catastrophic. The nervous system isn't only reacting to today's argument, it's reliving every moment of rejection, abandonment, or betrayal from years past. The wound is never just in the past. It lives in the present until it is healed. Consider the famous case of Princess Diana. Behind the royal facade, she openly spoke of her loneliness, her eating disorders, and her desperate search for love. Psychologists have pointed out that her troubled childhood, marked by her parents' divorce and absence, resurfaced in her repeated attraction to men who could not meet her emotional needs. Her story shows how unresolved wounds not only shape personal choices, but can echo across the world stage. And it's not an isolated case. In fact, the American Psychological Association reports that people with unresolved childhood trauma are 3 times more likely to engage in relationships marked by instability and conflict. But there is more at stake than love. Emotional wounds don't just repeat themselves in our relationships, they seep into our careers, our friendships, our self-image. Freud suggested that the wound becomes a lens, and we see the world through it. Jung believed that unless we confront the wound, it becomes our shadow, dictating our choices in silence. Marcus Aurelius warned, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." His point is striking. When we fail to master the wound within, we surrender our freedom to it. So why do these wounds keep repeating? Because the psyche is desperate for resolution. The repetition is not punishment, it is an attempt at healing. Imagine someone abandoned as a child. Unconsciously, they may choose partners who abandon them again, not because they want pain, but because they hope this time will be different. This time maybe the person will stay. This is the cruel paradox of emotional wounds. They drive us to reenact the very scenario that hurt us, hoping to rewrite the ending. Modern neuroscience shows that healing begins when the brain experiences corrective emotional experiences. This means encountering a situation where the wound is triggered, but the outcome is different. For example, when someone who fears abandonment finally experiences a partner who stays, the brain's wiring begins to shift. Over time, new neural pathways form, and the compulsion to repeat diminishes. Viktor Frankl, who endured the unimaginable pain of the Holocaust, wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Healing a wound is exactly that, not erasing the past, but transforming our relationship with it. And here is the hidden truth: the wounds will continue to repeat until they teach us what we need to learn. They are not random, not meaningless. They are life's way of asking us to grow. The Stoics would call them tests of resilience. Jung would call them opportunities for integration. Neuroscience calls them plasticity in motion. Whatever language you choose, the message is the same. Your wounds are not chains, they are signals. And when you listen, when you finally recognize them, you begin to break the cycle. So ask yourself, which wound keeps showing up in your life? Because once you see it, you hold the first key to freedom. The wound stops being destiny and becomes the doorway to transformation. Marcus Aurelius, in his meditations, reminded himself each morning, "When you wake up, tell yourself, today you will meet people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." He was not being cynical. He was practicing awareness, the art of preparing the mind before life unfolds its inevitable tests. And this awareness, the Stoics believed, is the very power that frees us from repeating destructive cycles in relationships. Because here's the truth: you cannot control who you meet, but you can control how much power you give to those encounters. Seneca warned that fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling. In modern terms, this means that if you remain blind to your patterns, life will drag you through them again and again until you finally open your eyes. But once awareness enters, once you learn to observe instead of just react, you begin to break free. Psychology calls this metacognition, the ability to step back and witness your thoughts rather than drown in them. Neuroscience shows that practices like mindfulness and cognitive reframing literally rewire the prefrontal cortex, giving you greater control over emotional impulses. The Stoics discovered centuries ago what science is only now proving. Awareness is the hinge on which freedom swings. Let's look at numbers. A 2018 study from Harvard found that people who practiced daily mindfulness reduced emotional reactivity by nearly 40%. Another study from Stanford showed that awareness-based cognitive therapy decreased relapse into toxic relationship patterns by 43%. These aren't abstract ideas, they are measurable shifts, and the Stoics practiced them daily. Epictetus taught his students that men are disturbed not by things but by the views which they take of them. That single line contains a universe of psychological wisdom. What disturbs us is not the person who ignores us, but the story we tell ourselves about what that means. What hurts is not the betrayal itself, but the belief that it defines our worth. Think of someone like Nelson Mandela, who after 27 years in prison emerged not bitter, but free in spirit. When asked how he survived, he often pointed to awareness of choice, the ability to master his mind when he could not master his circumstances. Mandela read the Stoics in prison, and their wisdom helped him see that awareness is power, not weakness. Neuroscience confirms this. Brain scans of long-term meditators who practice Stoic-like observation of thoughts show enlarged gray matter in areas linked to self-regulation and compassion. What the Stoics practiced through philosophy, science now validates through MRI machines. But let's bring this back to you. Why do you keep attracting the same type of people? Because without awareness, you move through relationships on autopilot. The old wound gets triggered, the same reaction unfolds, and the cycle continues. Seneca would say, "You are being dragged." But imagine instead beginning each day with Marcus's exercise. Imagine telling yourself, today I will meet people who may ignore me, disappoint me, flatter me, or try to use me. But none of that has power over my soul unless I grant it. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It is radical clarity. It's stepping into the battlefield with armor instead of being caught naked by surprise. And here lies the transformative tension. Without awareness, life feels like fate. With awareness, fate becomes choice. Jung echoed this when he said that what remains unconscious will rule your life until you name it. The Stoics would add that once you name it, you can master it. Neuroscience offers the final proof. Naming emotions reduces their intensity by nearly 30%, according to studies at UCLA. When Marcus Aurelius wrote about preparing for difficult people, he was practicing the psychological equivalent of naming the storm before it arrived, making it smaller by stripping it of surprise. Awareness is not passive. It is the beginning of mastery. It allows you to see the manipulator without needing to submit, to notice the avoidant partner without falling into despair, to recognize the toxic pattern without stepping into it. And this is where Stoicism is not just philosophy, it is practice. It teaches us that awareness is freedom, and freedom is the end of repetition. So the question is, will you remain dragged by your wounds, or will you, like Marcus, begin each day by facing reality with open eyes? Because once awareness enters, the cycle begins to break. Fate no longer drags you. It begins to follow you. Aristotle once said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. If our repeated choices create our character, then the people we keep attracting reveal the habits of our mind and heart. The good news is that habits can be rewired. Modern neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new pathways, to literally reshape itself. And this is the key to breaking the cycle. Understanding that what feels like destiny is often just repetition, and repetition can be changed. Let's begin with the science. A study from University College London found that forming a new habit takes, on average, 66 days. Not 21 as the myth goes, 66. That means with consistent practice, 2 months are enough to begin reshaping the way your brain responds to attraction, to conflict, to intimacy. Another study from MIT showed that neural pathways associated with old habits don't disappear. They weaken as new ones grow stronger. In other words, you don't erase the past, you build a stronger future. But how does this apply to relationships? Carl Jung believed that when we repeatedly attract the same type of person, it is because we have not integrated a part of ourselves. Breaking the cycle, then, requires turning inward, not outward. Instead of asking, "Why are they like this?" we begin to ask, "Well, why am I drawn to this?" Psychology calls this shadow work. The Stoics would call it examining the self. Seneca insisted, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Breaking the cycle is adversity chosen deliberately. Practical strategies exist. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for instance, has been shown to reduce relapse into toxic relationship choices by nearly 50%. The practice is simple but profound. Notice the thought, challenge it, replace it. A partner cancels plans and your wound whispers, "You're not important." Awareness steps in and you respond, "Or maybe they're overwhelmed," or "Maybe this doesn't define my worth." Over time, this rewiring changes not just your thoughts, but your attraction itself. Another powerful tool is journaling. Marcus Aurelius's meditations were, at their core, a private journal, a way of catching his thoughts before they caught him. Modern studies show that expressive writing lowers stress, improves clarity, and reduces the intensity of emotional triggers. Neuroscience explains why. Writing engages the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of the brain, weakening the emotional storm created by the amygdala. What Marcus did with a wax tablet, we now know as cognitive self-regulation. But it's not just solitary work. Relationships themselves can be healing. The concept of the corrective emotional experience, coined by Franz Alexander, describes how a new, healthier relationship rewires the brain. When someone who fears abandonment experiences loyalty instead, or someone who fears rejection experiences acceptance, the old wound begins to lose its grip. This is why therapy, friendship, or even one healthy love can sometimes do what years of struggle could not. The brain learns safety by living it. Real-world examples remind us this is possible. Oprah Winfrey, who endured abuse and neglect in her youth, has often spoken of how therapy, self-reflection, and healthy connections allowed her to break cycles of pain. Neuroscience backs her story. People who actively engage in self-awareness practices are significantly less likely to repeat destructive patterns. What looks like willpower is actually rewiring in action. The Stoics remind us that the ultimate compass is not external but internal. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." To rewire your inner compass means to stop chasing validation outside and start cultivating stability inside. Modern psychology echoes this with self-differentiation, the ability to stay grounded in your own values, even when others pull at your emotions. So how do you begin? You start by noticing the familiar pull toward the same kind of person. You pause. You ask, is this attraction or is this repetition? That single question interrupts the automatic cycle. You write your thoughts. You reframe your beliefs. You expose yourself to healthier dynamics. You practice daily awareness, like Marcus did, and you trust the science that tells you 66 days of practice can begin to shift a lifetime of patterns. Breaking the cycle is not a miracle, it is a discipline. But discipline is exactly what turns wounds into wisdom. And when the compass inside you points toward clarity instead of compulsion, you no longer chase the same people. You attract differently. You live differently. Transformation never begins with others. It begins with you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The hidden patterns, the repeated attractions, the wounds we carry, they all lose their grip the moment we stop seeing ourselves as victims of fate and start seeing ourselves as authors of choice. Recognition is the doorway, but freedom is the step you take through it, and that step changes everything. Carl Jung believed that integration, making peace with the parts of ourselves we deny, is what makes us whole. Freud, from a different angle, showed that awareness breaks the repetition compulsion. Neuroscience adds its proof. Functional MRI studies show that when individuals consciously reframe their thoughts in moments of emotional trigger, the brain's amygdala calms while the prefrontal cortex strengthens. This is transformation made visible. The ancient Stoics and modern science, speaking across millennia, agree on one truth. Freedom is not found in changing others, but in mastering the self. But let's be clear, transformation is not about perfection, it is about progress. Think of Viktor Frankl surviving the horrors of the concentration camps, who wrote that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. If he could find freedom in the darkest conditions, what does that mean for us in our daily lives? It means that the repeated cycles of unhealthy relationships, the constant pull toward familiar wounds, are not destiny. They are training grounds for freedom. Consider the numbers. Studies show that people who engage in consistent self-reflection practices, whether journaling, therapy, or mindfulness, report a 60% decrease in repeating destructive relationship patterns. Another study from the University of Toronto found that practicing self-awareness and intentional behavior increases reported life satisfaction by 40%. These are not small numbers. They are evidence that recognition, when combined with action, reshapes the entire course of life. And examples surround us. Maya Angelou, reflecting on her life, once said, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." Her story, marked by trauma and resilience, shows us that recognition without action is unfinished work. But when you take what you've seen, what you've learned, and embody it in your choices, transformation becomes visible not only to you but to everyone around you. This is the essence of freedom, not the absence of pain, but the power to choose differently. Epictetus told his students that the true measure of a person is not how they are treated, but how they respond. Modern psychology echoes this with the concept of response flexibility, the ability to pause and choose your reaction instead of being driven by instinct. Neuroscience confirms that every time you pause and choose, you strengthen new neural pathways. What feels like a small choice? Saying no to a toxic relationship, setting a boundary, choosing self-respect, rewires your brain toward freedom. And here's the paradox. Transformation doesn't mean you will never be tested again. The same types of people may still appear in your life. The difference is that now you see them clearly. You no longer confuse familiarity with love. You no longer mistake intensity for intimacy. You no longer surrender your worth to someone else's approval. What once pulled you into repetition now becomes a mirror you can observe without stepping inside. That is true freedom. The Stoics saw life as a training ground for the soul. Marcus, Seneca, Epictetus all taught that adversity is not an enemy but a teacher. Jung believed the psyche sends us repeating patterns until we learn the lesson. Neuroscience calls it neuroplasticity in motion. Different words, one truth. Transformation is not a single moment but a practice. And the more you practice, the freer you become. So let me ask you now, what would your life look like if you no longer repeated the same patterns? What if recognition led you to awareness, and awareness to choice, and choice to freedom? Because that is possible. It is not abstract philosophy, it is lived reality. Thousands before you, from Stoic emperors to modern survivors, have proven it. Transformation is not waiting for you in someone else. It begins the moment you recognize your patterns, embrace your wounds, and choose differently. Recognition is the mirror. Action is the door. Freedom is the life that waits on the other side. And that life is already within your reach.